I only meant to help my best friend move boxes that day, but when his sister closed the door behind us, everything changed. I never thought helping my best friend move would be anything more than a long, tiring Saturday. The kind of day filled with cardboard boxes, dusty books, and the occasional argument about whether something should be thrown away or kept, just in case. But the moment I stepped through that front door, the air shifted. It wasn't just another moving day, it was her. I'd seen his sister before, of course, but only in passing. A polite hello in the hallway, a brief nod at family gatherings. She was always this figure on the edges of my life, someone I noticed but never allowed myself to look at too long. Older, composed, with a kind of grace that didn't need to be announced. But today, I don't know, maybe it was the light through the open curtains, or maybe it was just that I wasn't expecting her to be there. Whatever it was, I felt it instantly. She stood at the bottom of the staircase, balancing a stack of folded blankets in her arms, and for a moment I just watched her. The way she shifted her weight lightly on one foot, the way a loose strand of hair fell against her cheek and she tucked it back behind her ear with such unconscious elegance. It was such a small gesture, but it struck me like something meant only for my eyes. "Glad you could make it," she said, her voice warm, steady, carrying the kind of calm authority of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. I smiled, nodding quickly, trying not to seem awkward, though my chest felt strangely tight. The house smelled faintly of fresh coffee, probably hers, since my best friend never touched the stuff. Boxes lined the hallway, stacked unevenly against the wall, and sunlight spilled across the floorboards, turning the dust in the air into golden flecks. She moved past me, and I caught the quiet creak of the wooden boards beneath her steps. I offered to take the blankets from her, and when our hands brushed, it was nothing, really, just a passing touch. But it was enough. The softness of her fingers against mine lasted longer in my mind than it should have. She thanked me with a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, but lingered just enough to make me wonder what was behind it. As we carried things into the living room, she kept glancing at me in those quick, almost invisible ways, like she was measuring how much I'd grown since she last really noticed me. Or maybe that was just me imagining things. Either way, I couldn't help noticing her, every detail, every movement. It was nothing dramatic, nothing loud or obvious. But in those first few minutes, I felt something stir quietly in the background of an ordinary day. Something I didn't yet have words for, but I knew, deep down, that this moving day wasn't going to be like any other. We ended up side by side sooner than I expected. Her brother, my best friend, had disappeared into the garage to sort through tools, which left just the two of us in the hallway with a leaning tower of boxes that needed carrying upstairs. It started out simple, me lifting, her guiding. She had a natural way of taking charge without making it seem like she was. "This one goes in the corner room," she'd say, her voice calm but firm, pointing with a tilt of her chin. I'd nod, follow her lead, and each time I returned, there she was, waiting with another task, another quick smile. The thing about working beside someone is that silence stops feeling empty after a while. It turns into its own kind of language. The scuff of our shoes on the wooden floor. The soft thud of boxes setting down. The faint sound of her laugh whenever I muttered something sarcastic about the sheer number of old photo albums her brother apparently refused to throw away. At one point, we both reached for the same box. Our fingers touched barely, but it was enough to send a small jolt through me. Not dramatic, not like in the movies where everything freezes, but real. Her hand was warm, softer than I expected, and she hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Her eyes lifted to mine, and in that moment, the busy house seemed quieter. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Sorry. Habit of mine. I like to do things myself." I smiled, though my chest felt oddly tight. "Guess I'll have to fight you for the heavy ones then." Her grin widened just slightly, and she stepped aside, letting me take the box. But as I carried it away, I could still feel the ghost of her touch lingering on my skin, and it refused to fade as quickly as it should have. The work went on, but it changed after that. We moved in rhythm, passing items, brushing shoulders when space got too narrow, sharing little comments that no one else would have caught. She had this way of making the most ordinary task feel personal, like the two of us were part of something only we understood. I noticed the small things. The way she pushed a loose sleeve up her arm when it kept falling down. The way she exhaled with a soft sigh whenever she set something heavy down. The way her hair slipped forward when she bent over a box. Each detail anchored itself in my mind, uninvited but impossible to ignore. The others were nearby, their voices echoing faintly from outside and down the hall, but somehow they felt far away. With her standing close, her presence filling the quiet between us, it was like we had carved out a separate little world in the middle of a house that was supposed to be crowded and chaotic. And though I couldn't have explained why at the time, I realized I was beginning to look forward to every new excuse that kept us side by side. We carried another stack of boxes upstairs, heavier this time, and she led me toward the far end of the hallway. The room was nearly empty, just bare walls, a window cracked open to let in late afternoon light, and the faint smell of old wood mixed with dust. I stepped inside first, setting the box down with a soft thud. She followed, her arms full, her footsteps careful against the creaking boards. Then, almost casually, she reached behind her and pushed the door shut. The sound was small, just a quiet click of the latch, but it felt louder somehow. Final, almost deliberate. I glanced back at her, half expecting an explanation, but she didn't give one. She only leaned her shoulder lightly against the doorframe for a moment, as if taking the weight off her arms, and then crossed into the room with me. It was nothing, really. Just a door. Yet in that instant, the whole atmosphere shifted. The muffled voices from the rest of the house faded into the background. The laughter and shuffling of feet downstairs became distant, almost unreal. What remained was silence, thick, still, and charged. I felt it in my chest, a quiet awareness that we were suddenly alone in a way we hadn't been before. The air seemed heavier, the space smaller. Even the dust floating in the sunlight looked suspended, as though time itself had slowed down to watch us. She set her box down next to mine and straightened, brushing her palms together. Her movements were calm, unhurried, but her eyes lingered on me a fraction longer than they needed to. And I realized I was staring back, tracing the curve of her expression, the slight rise and fall of her breathing, the way the light from the window softened the edges of her face. For a moment neither of us spoke. My thoughts scrambled, searching for something casual to say, something that would make me look less caught up in the sudden weight of the moment. But the words never came. She was the one who broke the silence. "This room always feels different," she said quietly, glancing around. "Like it remembers things." Her voice was low, thoughtful, and I found myself listening more to the texture of it than the words themselves. Still, I nodded, not entirely sure what to say in return. We both stood there, surrounded by stacks of boxes that somehow didn't matter anymore. The world outside the door kept moving, but inside, it was just us, two people suspended in a pause that neither of us seemed ready to step out of. It wasn't a confession, or a touch, or anything dramatic. Just the simple act of a closed door, and the silence it created. Yet in that silence, something unspoken had taken root, and I felt it settle deep inside me, a quiet realization that this day was leading somewhere I hadn't expected at all. I leaned back against the wall, pretending I needed the rest, though really I just needed something steady beneath me. She mirrored me across the room, her back to the opposite wall, arms loosely crossed like she was holding something invisible in place. For the first time all day, the task stopped. No boxes to carry, no voices calling us. Just stillness. She let out a slow breath, tilting her head back until it brushed the wall behind her. "I don't usually let people see me like this," she said softly. Her words caught me off guard. "Like what?" I asked. She gave a small, self-conscious smile, eyes shifting to the floor before finding mine again. "Tired. Messy. A little undone, I guess." She laughed under her breath, but it was the kind of laugh that carried a hint of vulnerability. "I've always been the one who keeps things moving, keeps things together. I don't often stop long enough for people to notice when I'm human. Something about the way she said it pulled at me. Not dramatic, not a cry for sympathy, but honest. Raw in a way that most people never showed. You make it look easy, I said quietly, before I even thought about the words. Holding everything together, I mean. But I've noticed. Even when you're tired, there's this calm about you. She blinked at me, and for a second I thought I'd said too much. Her expression softened though, the corners of her lips turning upward, though not in the way people smile when they're amused, more like when they're moved. That's kind of you to say, she murmured. She shifted her weight, arms uncrossing, hands brushing idly against her own arms like she didn't know where to put them. Most people don't notice. I hesitated, then stepped a little closer, not enough to close the space completely, but enough that my voice dropped naturally lower. I do. I always have. Her eyes held mine then, steady, searching. The room was quiet except for the faint creak of wood under our shifting feet, the distant echo of someone moving furniture down the hall. But all of that felt blurred background. She tilted her head, studying me, and there was something in her expression I couldn't quite name, something between surprise and recognition. You're different than I thought, she said at last. I gave a half-smile, more to hide the rush of nerves in my chest than anything. Different how? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch, her gaze tracing my face like she was deciding whether to trust what she saw there. Finally, she said, more observant. More sincere. Her voice dropped even softer. You notice things I thought no one saw. I swallowed, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. For a moment, it felt like the room itself was listening, holding its breath with us. And in that pause, I realized something had shifted, not just in her, but in me too. The walls we'd both kept carefully intact had cracked, just enough to let something real slip through. She moved toward a box stacked against the far wall, crouching down to tug at it. I noticed the way she braced herself, one hand on the floor for balance, the other pulling at the cardboard edge. It was heavier than she expected. I could see the strain in her shoulders as she tried to shift it. Careful, I said, stepping forward before I could stop myself. I've got it, she replied, her voice steady but her body leaning awkwardly as the box tilted. And then it happened. She stumbled, just slightly, her foot catching on the corner of another box. Instinct took over. My hand shot out, finding her waist, steadying her before she could fall. It was nothing dramatic, just a small misstep. But the second my palm pressed against her side, time seemed to slow. Her body leaned into mine for balance, soft warmth beneath the fabric of her shirt, her breath catching as she regained herself. She didn't pull away. Not immediately. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on my forearm, as though anchoring herself. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it lingered. And in that pause, the space between us narrowed into something charged, something neither of us had planned. I could feel the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the rise and fall of her chest so close to mine. The faint scent of her perfume, subtle, floral, grounded, wrapped itself around me, pulling me deeper into the moment. My hand still rested against her waist, and though I knew I should let go, some part of me resisted. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, steady and searching. There was no laughter this time, no polite smile to brush it off. Just silence, heavy and full, as if both of us were listening to the same unspoken truth humming in the air. You're very quick to catch someone, she murmured, her tone quiet but threaded with something warmer, something softer. I swallowed, my throat dry. Maybe I just didn't want to see you fall. The corners of her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something close, something that made my chest tighten. Her hand stayed on my arm, her fingers pressing lightly as though she was memorizing the shape of the moment. Neither of us moved for what felt like a long time. The rest of the world, boxes, voices, the work waiting outside, faded. All that existed was the simple contact of hand to waist, hand to arm, and the silent recognition that it meant more than it should. Finally, slowly, she eased back just enough to stand fully upright, though her touch trailed away reluctantly, as if she was the one hesitating now. My hand slipped away too, leaving behind an emptiness that felt sharper than I expected. But the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive. A shared pause, heavy with what had almost been said. And in her eyes I saw it clearly, something unspoken, something that had been waiting for the right moment to surface. And maybe, just maybe, we had found it. After the stumble, after that touch neither of us seemed eager to release, the air in the room changed again. Heavier, but not uncomfortable, like the pause between two notes in a song, suspended and expectant. She gestured toward a stack of flattened boxes near the wall. "We should take a break before we wear ourselves out," she said, her tone light, though her eyes held something weightier. We sat down side by side on the low pile, the cardboard dipping slightly beneath our weight. The space was narrow, so our shoulders brushed just enough that I felt the warmth of her body against mine. Not intentional, maybe, but neither of us shifted away. For a moment, we said nothing. The muffled sounds of the house carried faintly through the walls, laughter from downstairs, the scrape of furniture across the floor, but in here, it felt like the world was far away. She was the first to break the silence. "I grew up in this house," she said softly, her gaze drifting toward the window. "Every corner has some memory attached to it. It's strange to see it like this, half empty, half waiting to be let go." Her voice carried a quiet ache, one I hadn't heard before. I turned slightly toward her, studying the way her fingers traced an absent pattern against her knee. "It must be hard," I said, "watching pieces of your life get packed into boxes." She nodded slowly, then gave a faint, wistful smile. "Harder than I want to admit. But I guess that's what moving on is, isn't it? Knowing when to let go." I wanted to say something comforting, something wise. Instead, I just let the moment stretch, my shoulder pressing more firmly into hers, hoping the quiet weight of my presence could be enough. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes lingering longer than they ever had before. And with a small, almost playful tilt of her head, she reached out and brushed at my shirt, where a faint smear of dust clung. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary, trailing lightly against the fabric, against me. I froze, not out of discomfort, but because every nerve in me seemed to wake at once. Her touch was so subtle, so ordinary, yet it carried the same charge as if she'd whispered something I wasn't supposed to hear. "There," she said softly, though her hand didn't fall away immediately. "Clean." My lips curved into a quiet smile. "Thanks. Guess I needed that." Her hand finally dropped back to her lap, but the imprint of it remained. We both sat there, closer than we should have been, the silence between us no longer empty but alive, alive with things we weren't saying, with the question of what might happen if we did. And though either of us moved across that line, I knew, we both knew, that the line was already thinning, fraying, waiting. The voices outside the room grew louder, his brother calling from the hall, someone laughing downstairs. Reality was pressing against the door, reminding us that we hadn't truly disappeared, even if it had felt that way for a while. She sighed softly, the kind of sigh that carries both relief and reluctance. "We should probably get back before they wonder what's taking us so long," she said, her tone steady but gentler than before. I nodded, though my body didn't want to move. Sitting there beside her, the warmth of her shoulder still against mine, it felt like stepping out of this room would be stepping away from something fragile, something we might never find again if we let it slip. She rose first, smoothing her shirt, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. I stood a beat later, slower, almost hoping the delay would stretch the moment longer. We both hesitated by the door, either reaching for the handle. Then she turned toward me, and before I could think, before I could brace for it, she leaned in. Her lips brushed my cheek, light, fleeting, yet powerful enough to still my breath. The warmth of her skin lingered, sending a quiet tremor through me that no amount of heavy lifting earlier had managed to cause. When she drew back, her eyes carried a playful spark, but beneath it, something softer. "Don't tell him I slowed you down," she whispered, her voice a low secret meant only for me. I managed a smile, though my heart was pounding far too hard for such a simple request. "Your secret's safe with me," I said. And I meant more than just the words. For a moment, we stood there, the silence wrapping around us one last time. I wanted to say something, anything, to capture what this had meant, how a single afternoon had shifted something deep inside me. But the words wouldn't come. And maybe they weren't needed. She reached past me then, her hand brushing my arm as she turned the handle. The door opened, and sound rushed back in, voices, footsteps, the bustle of moving day. The world resumed, as if the last hour had been only a pause. But as she stepped out ahead of me, her hand lingered just briefly at her side, fingers grazing mine in a final, fleeting touch. A reminder. A promise. Something unspoken, but real. I followed her into the hall, carrying nothing in my hands, yet feeling heavier somehow, like I was holding on to something invisible but undeniable. That day, I had come just to help my best friend move. But when his sister closed the door behind us, she opened something else entirely. Something I hadn't been expecting. Something I knew, as I touched the spot on my cheek where her lips had been, that I'd carry with me long after the boxes were gone. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more slow burn age gap romance stories. And in the comments tell me, have you ever felt that spark in an unexpected moment, when a simple touch or glance meant more than words? I'd love to hear your stories.